I remember the year I was invited to a king's Christmas. Now, I have visited many kings and queens in my time. I have flown over shining palaces with golden roofs and walked quietly through halls lined with paintings and tapestries. I have seen crowns glittering under chandeliers and long tables covered with feasts. But this Christmas was different, because this king, though he wore a great crown and lived in a castle on a hill, did not know what Christmas truly was. It began on a cold evening, when the snow was falling in lazy flakes, drifting down like feathers shaken from a giant pillow in the sky. I was high above the clouds, my sleigh slicing through the starlit air, when I noticed a patch of darkness in the valley below. Most towns and villages glowed with warm lights and flickering candles, but one hill stood out, black and silent, though at its top I could see the outline of a grand castle. I guided the reindeer lower, curious. As we approached, I saw the stone walls, tall towers, and a great gate made of iron and oak. Torches burned dimly in the courtyard. But there were no garlands, no wreaths, no music floating up through the windows. The castle looked more like a fortress bracing for battle than a home preparing for joy. I landed quietly in the shadow of one of the towers, leaving the sleigh hidden beneath a heavy drift of snow. The reindeer snorted and shook their heads, their bells giving a soft jingle that seemed almost out of place here. I patted their necks and walked toward a narrow side door, the kind that servants use and kings rarely notice. Inside, the air was warm but tense. Servants hurried down the corridors, carrying trays and tinsel and boxes of ornaments, their faces pinched with worry instead of lit with excitement. A boy carrying a stack of candles nearly collided with me before he even realized I was there. He stared up at me, wide-eyed. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Just a visitor," I said with a smile. "Tell me, young friend, why does this castle feel like a winter without snow?" He looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "His Majesty has ordered Christmas to be perfect," he whispered. "Every ribbon, every candle, every ornament must be placed exactly so. No crumbs on a table, no children laughing too loudly, no carols unless he approves each one. If anything is out of place, he grows angry. We are all afraid to make a mistake." "Afraid?" I murmured. "In a castle at Christmas?" The boy nodded. "He has invited important guests from all over the land. He wants them to see that his kingdom is the most orderly, the most splendid, the most impressive. But," the boy hesitated, "it doesn't feel like Christmas. It feels like an examination." I thanked him and let him hurry on. Then I made my way deeper into the castle, unseen by most, listening as I walked. I heard scolding in the kitchens, where cooks were told the cakes must be taller and the sugar dusted more evenly. I heard sighs in the hallways, where servants were told to walk more quietly and stand more straight. In the great hall, a giant tree stood perfectly trimmed, its branches hung with glass baubles and shining ribbons. But no one dared touch it, and no child's laughter rang around it. At last I came to a wide set of doors leading into the throne room. Inside, the king sat on a high seat at the far end of the hall. He wore a heavy crown and a robe trimmed with fur. His beard was carefully trimmed, his hair combed back like polished metal. Around him, officials stood in neat lines, each holding a scroll or a ledger. On one side of the room, a choir of children stood quietly, clutching songbooks but not yet singing. The king's voice echoed off the high stone walls. "Is the guest list final?" he demanded. "Yes, your majesty," an advisor replied, bowing. "The dukes, the lords, the merchants, and the visiting ambassadors will all arrive by midnight." "And the decorations?" the king asked, eyes sweeping the hall. "Do they show our greatness?" "Yes, your majesty," another answered quickly. "Everything is in perfect symmetry. Not one ornament hangs lower than another." The king nodded, but there was no joy in his face, only a tight, restless pride. "And the entertainment?" he pressed. "Carols, speeches, the feast?" "Prepared, your majesty," they replied. "We have rehearsed every song. We have counted every plate and cup." The king leaned back, but his fingers drummed the arm of his throne. "Good," he said. This Christmas must be remembered. When they speak of my reign, they must say he held the finest celebrations, the grandest gatherings, the most flawless feasts. There must be no mistakes." He almost spit out that last word. One of the choir boys shifted his wheat and his book slipped from his hands, thudding quietly onto the floor. The sound was small, but in that tense room, it rang like a drum. The king's gaze snapped to the boy. "You there," he barked. "Careless child, if you cannot even hold a book, how can you be trusted to sing before my guests?" The boy blushed and bent quickly to pick it up, his hands trembling. No one spoke. The music director gave him a sharp nudge, and the boy stared at the ground, shame burning through his small shoulders. That was enough for me. I stepped forward. "I think," I said, my voice carrying easily to the far end of the hall, "that singing and making mistakes go together quite naturally. Hearts are not clocks, Your Majesty. They do not beat in perfect time." Every head turned. The officials gasped. Some of the advisors looked ready to faint. The choir children stared openly, their mouths forming little O's of surprise. The king's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he said slowly. "To walk into my throne room unannounced and speak as if we are equals?" I met his gaze and gave a small bow. "Some call me Santa Claus," I said. "Some call me St. Nicholas, Father Christmas, or simply the man in the red coat. I travel a great deal, especially at this time of year. And tonight, as I passed over your kingdom, I felt something missing here, so I came to see." Murmurs rippled through the hall. A few of the children smiled shyly when they heard my name. The king frowned. "You come at an inconvenient time," he said. "I am preparing for guests. Christmas here must be flawless." "I have heard," I replied gently, "that you want it to be perfect." "Yes," he said firmly. "Perfect decorations, perfect music, perfect behavior. No sloppiness, no foolishness, no noise that does not fit the plan." "And what of joy?" I asked. "Laughter, surprise, forgiveness when someone drops a book or sings a wrong note?" The king's jaw tightened. "Joy comes when everything is as it should be, when nothing goes wrong." "Ah," I said softly, "then perhaps that is why Christmas has not yet arrived in your castle." His expression darkened. "We have a tree, we have candles, we have the finest food and drink, we have a choir and a guest list. Do you mean to tell me that is not enough?" "You have all the pieces," I said, "but you have locked them in a cage. You have mistaken control for peace and fear for respect." One of the advisors sputtered, "How dare you?" The king raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes stayed fixed on me. There was anger there, yes, but also curiosity. "You speak boldly," he said. "If you know so much, then tell me, what does Christmas require that I have not already provided?" I walked slowly toward the center of the hall. As I did, I looked at the choir children. "Little ones," I asked, "what do you feel tonight?" They glanced nervously at the king, then at me. At last, one girl spoke, her voice very small. "Scared," she whispered. "I'm afraid I'll sing wrong and spoil the king's Christmas." Another boy nodded. "I'm afraid I'll cough in the middle of the song," he said, "or forget the words." I turned to the servants standing along the walls. "And you?" I asked. "What do you feel?" A maid twisted her apron. "Tired," she admitted. "We have worked all day and all night. I'm afraid if I drop a plate or spill a drink, I'll be sent away." The cook, still in his apron, spoke up. "I'm afraid the roast will be too dry, or the pudding not rich enough, and that everyone will talk about my failure." The hall fell quiet. I faced the king again. "They are not thinking about the meaning of Christmas," I said. "They are not thinking about generosity or gratitude or wonder. They are thinking only of not failing you. Their fear is louder than their joy." He shifted on his throne, eyes flicking over the faces before him. For the first time that night, he seemed to truly see them. "Well," he said stiffly, "I cannot bear chaos. A kingdom must run on order." "Order is valuable," I agreed, "but Christmas is not a parade to be drilled. It is a gift to be received. Do you know the story behind this celebration, Your Majesty?" He frowned. "Of course, a child born in a stable long ago. Angels, shepherds, wise men, all that. The priests tell it every year." "Then you know," I said, "that the king this day remembers was born among the poor, in a place no one expected, to parents who had nowhere else to go. There was nothing flawless about that night. Cows lowed, straw scratched, the air was cold. Yet it was full of light, full of love. No one checked if the shepherd's clothes were symmetrical. No one sent them away for singing off-key. A smile tugged at one of the choir boys' mouths before he could stop it. "You want your guests to remember your Christmas?" I went on. "So give them something they cannot find at any other banquet. A place where they are allowed to be human, where children can laugh and burst into song without fearing they will be scolded, where a dropped fork is met with kindness instead of rage, where the king himself is not afraid to smile." The advisors looked scandalized at this idea. One of them whispered, "Smile?" as if it were a dangerous word, but the king leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "And if I did this," he said slowly, "what would they think of me? They might see imperfections. They might see weakness. Or," I replied, "they might see a man who remembers that he is more than his crown. They might see a host instead of a ruler. They might see a king who understands that greatness is not measured by how frightened people are in his presence, but by how much peace they feel when they are near him." Silence settled over the hall again, but it was different now. It was as if the room itself were holding its breath. Finally, the king took off his crown. It was a small movement, but it sent a shiver through everyone watching. He held the crown in his hands for a moment, then set it down gently on a small table beside the throne. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "I have spent so many years tightening my grip, making sure nothing slips out of place. I've forgotten how to let things be." I smiled. "You do not have to know everything at once," I said. "You only have to begin." He turned to the choir. "Children," he said, his voice softer than before, "what song do you like best? Not the one I chose, not the one the court prefers. Your favorite." They looked at each other, startled. Then a small boy with a crooked collar raised his hand. "There's a silly one about bells," he said hesitantly. "We like it because it's fast, and we all get mixed up and start laughing." The music director looked horrified. The king looked thoughtful. "Sing it," he said. The children froze. "Now?" the girl with the dropped book asked. "Now," the king said. "Sing it as you would if no one here could punish you for mistakes." They glanced once at me, then at him, and then the boy lifted his voice. At first it wobbled, hesitant. Then others joined in, the melody tumbling out, too quick, too joyful to stay perfectly in line. One child came in too early on a verse and burst into giggles. Another sang a bit too loudly. By the second chorus, the whole choir was laughing and singing at once, their fear melting away into delight. And then something happened I will not forget. The king laughed. It was not a polite chuckle or a forced smile. It was a real laugh, rusty with disuse, like a bell that had not been rung in many years. His shoulders relaxed. The lines around his eyes softened. The advisors stared, stunned, as if they had just seen the statue in the square come to life. "Again," he said when the children finished, breathless and beaming. "Sing it again, louder this time." They did. Voices rose to the high rafters, bright and free. The servants along the walls began to hum along. Someone in the kitchen started clapping in time. The heavy air in the castle lifted. Later that night, the guests arrived. They found the castle still splendid, the tables still laden with food, the tree still gleaming. But they also found something they had never seen there before. They found children chasing each other around the base of the tree, their hair coming loose from careful braids. They found the king listening to an old soldier's story with genuine interest, rather than glancing over his shoulder for someone more important. They found servants invited to taste the feast and sit, just for a while, at the edges of the hall to rest their tired feet. And they found themselves drawn into something warmer than perfection. At one point, when a tray slipped and a dozen sugared cookies crashed to the floor, the entire hall froze, waiting for the explosion of anger. The young maid who had dropped them stood trembling, eyes filling with tears. The king rose. He walked over, knelt, and began picking up the crumbs with his own hands. "There," he said gently to the maid. "I dropped enough things as a boy. Tonight, we will let a few cookies escape. We have plenty more." The girl stared at him in astonishment. Then she smiled, a small, shy curve of the lips that grew as others bent to help. Soon the accident had become a shared joke. The tension broke like a thin sheet of ice under warm sun. I watched it all from the shadows near the great tree, my heart full. When midnight finally came and I slipped back out into the snowy courtyard, the castle behind me glowed with more than candlelight. It glowed with something that cannot be hung from ceilings or arranged on tables. It glowed with hearts that had loosened their grip on fear. As I climbed into my sleigh, I heard the king's voice drifting out through an open window. "Next year," he was saying, "let the children choose the first song. And make sure there is time after the feast for stories, true ones. We have been pretending long enough." The reindeer tossed their heads, eager to be off. I took up the reins. That was the king's Christmas I remember most clearly, not because it was the grandest, though it was splendid indeed, but because it was the year a man who thought he had to be flawless discovered that it was all right to be human. It was the year a throne room became a living room, and a king became, for one night at least, a father to his people. So if you ever feel that you must make your own Christmas perfect, that every decoration must be straight, every plan must go exactly as imagined, every moment must be polished and impressive, remember that castle on the hill. Remember the frightened children, the weary servants, and the king who finally laughed. Remember how Christmas truly arrived, not when everything was in order, but when love was allowed to be larger than fear. Your tree does not have to be symmetrical. Your song does not have to be sung without mistakes. Your table does not have to groan under 100 dishes. What matters is the warmth shared around it, the forgiveness offered when tempers fray, the quiet decision to choose kindness over control. I will be out there as always, flying over rooftops, listening at chimneys, smiling at crooked stars on homemade cookies and lopsided snowmen in front yards. And when I see a home where someone sighs, lets go of perfect, and chooses to laugh instead, I will think of that king and bless your house a little extra. Merry Christmas to all, and may your heart find its joy not in getting everything right, but in loving one another well.